I will move forward, and I have moved forward in my life. And
That's
I think
so beautiful.
resilience is just picking up, knowing that you can't do it, but putting one foot in front of the other. And well, I feel like that's when your support angels come in, and you have those earthly angels that step in and pick you up and move you forward and help you make decisions.
Welcome to another episode of Relentlessly Resilient, presented by Miki Couture, a weekly podcast where people share real-life experiences and the tools they develop to move forward and live their best lives. I'm Michelle Scharf.
And I'm Jennie Taylor, and we're excited to be here today, presented by Minky, as Michelle said, with a guest from Minky. Our guest today is Stephanie Harris here from the corporate sales office of Miki Couture. These beautiful blankets that we talk about week after week. There's 6 in-store locations in Utah, or find them online at minkicouture.com. Stephanie, how are you today?
I'm fantastic. Glad to be here. Thank you.
We are so grateful to have you. We're grateful for Minky for sponsoring the show and just providing that comfort and that warmth that every blanket brings. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up with Minky, and then we'll jump into how you ended up a guest on the show.
Okay. I worked for the owner, Sandy Hendry's husband, Mike Hendry, for 21 years in the title business at a company called Mountain View Title. And I worked with my husband in commercial title work. My husband would bring in the commercial deals, and then I would process the deals, and then Mark Hendry would close them. So we worked as a team for
great.
21 years.
Oh, wow.
In that business before my husband passed. And then after he passed away, decided I was ready for change and just needed to have a little bit less stress and see the world from a different angle. And so that's how I ended up at Minky. I was having chips and salsa with Sandy, who's my dear friend, and just said to her, "Have you got anything at Minky?" And she said, "Are you serious?" I said, "I am serious." And she said, "Yep, we'll find something." And so I've been there about 2 years now, and it's been a great experience. And
So you've known the Hendrys for a long time. Let's talk just for a quick second about Minky and the Hendrys, kind of the company, but also just the vision behind the blanket. Because if you've only ever seen the blanket or maybe been sent to the website to purchase a blanket or something, you don't understand just the beauty, the emotion, and really kind of the feeling behind every piece of cloth. So talk to that for a quick minute, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. I love to talk about this subject. Actually, I was at Mike and Sandy's house one night. We were around the barbecue pit, and Mike had cooked some salmon. And she brought a smaller size blanket out and put it around my shoulders, a Minky that she had sewn, and said, "What do you think about this? I'm thinking of doing this as a business." And I had just helped my daughter make one out of Minky fabric, a BYU one, for her husband, and knew the value of it and how expensive the fabric was, and thought this would be great. It'd be, and things were in the works behind the scenes at the time with her, and she'd had the one made for her daughter, and it just has snowballed. It's absolutely snowballed.
So you've been around kind of from the beginning.
I have, but I have to tell you, I had no idea the level. I knew she'd grown because I was working for Mike and Sandy, and obviously saw the 6 stores pop up around the country or around the state, and thought, this is incredible what she's doing. But until I saw the warehouse, I did not get the gravity of how much she had actually grown.
And now the 2 warehouses. Right? Their one warehouse full of blankets was not enough. It's remarkable. It's in our neck of the woods. I live up in Ogden. North Ogden's where I live, but the outlet store is at the location of the warehouse, which is where the headquarters is. And you can go into that outlet. And
I didn't even know there was an outlet.
It's unbelievable.
So sad
and
right
we're
now.
having a huge warehouse sale this Friday from 9 to 2.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, on the 17th. That would be great.
It seems you have sales all the time and promotions and deals. And
these warehouse sales, we do another one called Christmas in August that is the same type thing. And it's...
this show will be out in time for that one.
Yeah, we'll promote that.
Unfortunately, not for this Friday, but guess what? Guess where I'm going on Friday?
Michelle's got a few Minkies in each room.
I'll give you a tour of both warehouses. I've done that.
Unreal.
I've done that for Jennie.
Your jaw will hit the floor. Take some pictures when you're there, because you'll think you've seen a lot of blankets, and then you think you've seen a warehouse, and you just can't comprehend how large the warehouse is. What, over 1 million blankets stored in the one?
Yes.
Oh, it's amazing.
And the charitable giving side of the company is just incredible.
It's huge. My grandson was in primary children's and during Christmas, and so all of the kids were given Minky blankets, but I brought his Minky blanket that I had bought for him for Christmas when he went in to primary. So he had a couple there, but it's a big thing in our home.
And has been for a long time.
And it has been for a long time. 5 years ago, my husband died, but I had bought myself my favorite color in a minky, and my husband used that blanket for the last couple weeks of his life and died with that blanket on him.
Oh,
and it's the blanket that my kids all like to snuggle up in. Yeah. So
Yeah, there's a story behind every blanket.
Yep, there is.
really is.
It's
and
amazing.
they're as equally happy moments as they are
Right.
sad moments.
Touching.
Right.
And
Touching, but
yeah.
they're just a comfort
My
for
son
every
was in
occasion.
a motorcycle accident. Jenny brought him a little gray minky that was perfect size for laying
To
in
have
a
in a
hospital
hospital
bed.
bed.
And he still has that blanket and treasures it and loves it. You know, we are big minky fans and have been, I think, from the very inception. I am such a tactile person. And as soon as I felt those blankets, I was sold. I didn't care about the price. I saved up to slowly grow my selection of minkies, and I've got just about every blanket.
Yeah.
I think that, and I have one in my car.
Oh,
Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah.
My mother passed away 2 years ago, and she's could never get warm. So we had
just
given
always
her a minky.
chilled.
She was always cold, and that blanket was in 5 hospitals and 3 different.
Oh, my word.
When the ambulance would come to the home to get her, she had that blanket. The rehab center, everything. She had that up to
bless
here.
her.
So
Yeah.
they are very comforting.
It's really an amazing. It's just a blanket, and yet it's more.
It's so much more than a
It is so
blanket.
much It's more than a
I
blanket.
want to hear your story, though.
Yeah,
because
Stephanie,
I don't
tell
know.
us.
I kind of had a kind of an overview.
You mentioned that your
Give it to
husband
me.
passed away. Let's talk a little bit into your story with him, your family. Tell us a little bit about you and him.
I would love to. I have 5 children, and they're all married, and I just had my 16th grandchild
Oh my goodness!
last weekend.
Congratulations.
No way.
Yeah, so I had
16 is a
graduating,
bunch.
1 baptism on Saturday,
And one born.
one born on Friday.
wow.
So it's been a crazy
Well, that's a lot
grandma
of
weekend.
minkies right there. A lot of occasions.
my
A lot of
goodness.
sentiment.
And everyone got one.
And I'm sure they did.
Yes.
That's a lot of emotion to process as the sweet grandma. A lot of those milestones.
Yes.
Okay, 5 kids,
Yes,
16 grandkids.
16 grandkids. My daughter and I, with her children, were headed to Lehigh to go swimming one day with my other daughter and her kids, and got a phone call from my husband. He seemed very, very, very confused. We were almost to Salt Lake at the time, and he seemed very confused, just was grasping at, what day is it? Where was I?
Really?
Did I have an appointment with Angie today? Did I get my hair cut? He was so confused. I said, where are you? And he said, I'm in Roy. And I said, are you by the Roy exit? And he said, yes. I said, can you see Village Inn? And he said, yes. I said, pull in there and I will get an ambulance there. So
Oh,
we
my
had
word.
my son-in-law works for Hill Air Force Base, and he was the closest one in proximity at the time, and we had him go over and meet the ambulance. And he also has a friend who's a Weber County paramedic.
Oh, wow.
And met them over there. And we got turned around, and by the time we got to the hospital, my kids, who were scattered all across the valley, had all descended on the hospital because we knew. I felt like it was probably a TIA or a little mini stroke, and he was going to be fine. But
Was there anything leading up to before this day that you knew a confusing phone call meant call an ambulance, or was it just that disconcerting?
It was that
on the phone that
disconcerting.
this is not okay?
Something's wrong.
Wow.
He said to me, something happened. I don't know what happened. And, as we were processing it, we felt like he's probably had a little stroke,
Some
got
kind
to
of
the
stroke,
hospital. He was doing all the neuro checks that the nurses were asking him to do. And I thought, oh, great, we're going to be sent home with a blood thinner, and
Yeah.
we'll
and
be
on our way
we'll
to the
be
pool.
on our way.
Sure.
Well, little did we know that here's what I've learned, is that when they bring in a social worker, it's generally not good news. So the social worker came into the room with the neurologist, with the emergency room doctor, and they put his x-ray up on the screen, and he had a golf ball-sized brain tumor over his left ear.
No symptoms or anything
No
beforehand?
symptoms, no
Oh,
warning,
my gosh.
nothing.
So
And
what happened that triggered that?
he
confusion?
actually had a seizure. And looking at his shirt, he was sitting in the parking lot of his sister's. His sister cut hair, and she had a salon down on 25th and Wall. And he had been writing in his planner like he does every day to start out his day. And he'd had his hair cut and was sitting in the planner, writing in his planner, and then had the seizure. And then we have no idea, other than by the grace of God, how he got to Roy.
Made it to Roy.
He made it to Roy and was able to call and say something's wrong. He doesn't even know how he got there. He went on the back roads too. He wasn't on the freeway. So
Oh, my
yeah,
word.
crazy. So the neurologist there had an in with Huntsman and had us in to see the doctor at Huntsman the very next day.
Oh, my word.
And he was diagnosed with that brain tumor on June 6th of 2018, and he was gone June 26th. So less than 3 weeks, he was gone. And it's just been a roller coaster of emotions. I feel like I'm on stable ground some days, and then other days I feel like it's just barely happened, and how am I getting through? So, and what I realize is that this is just grief. And in talking with a dear friend of mine who's a grievance counselor, she said, you have to understand you're not only dealing with grief, you're dealing with trauma as well. Mm-hmm. And they're two totally different ball games. So give yourself some grace. And
there's a fantastic book you might really enjoy. It's called A Grieving Brain, and it talks about compounded grief and how that impacts us as we heal through grief.
I would love to read that. Thank you. Thank you
so
for that.
2018. We are all widows of the same year.
Yes.
Oh, what a year. I was just going to ask you, I knew it was near the time that Brent and John had died. I didn't realize how near.
You lost your husband a month before I lost mine.
I know. It's crazy. It's just crazy. And
so can we talk for a minute?
I lived in North Ogden for years, and so feel like
right there.
Yeah.
So you've got less than 3 weeks. Can you tell us about those 3 weeks between the diagnosis and then he's gone? No previous warning, no health?
No previous warning, no other health issue.
I think if I have a brain tumor, maybe I'll have headaches or I'll be dizzy or I'll just know.
You would think that they would drop something or, he would be dropping things.
He was okay until he wasn't.
He was okay until he wasn't.
So how
That's
did
a good way to put it.
When they gave you the diagnosis, did they let you know time was very, very limited?
No, what they said was,
years?
we don't know how to treat this until we get in there and biopsy it, because brain tumors are done in grades, not stages. So they don't say stage 4. They say you have a grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4. Grade 4 generally being a glioblastoma, which if you are diagnosed with that, you have probably 12 to 24 months if you do treat it, 3 to 5 months if you don't treat. Wow. So that one has a deadly diagnosis, but what his ultimately ended up being diagnosed with was a grade 3, which is an astrocytoma. So they weren't able to get very much out when they went into the surgery. They only were able to get out about 5% of the tumor because it was so intertwined and where it was. Yeah.
And you had nowhere near 12 to 24 months and not even anywhere near 3 to 5 months.
As a matter of fact, a dear friend of mine, her husband had been diagnosed with the glioblastoma the previous year. And I had just watched her at a dear friend of mine's function, keeping her husband grounded, and he couldn't see. He'd lost his sight. And I went home from that experience feeling so heartbroken for her and what she was going through. And then come to find out, we're diagnosed the month after that, and he's gone 3 weeks later. And then my friend's husband passed ultimately about 8 months after Matt did.
He still had that. He did have almost a couple years from.
Yes, he had 22 months. So.
It's so crazy how it's just all different.
So different.
We just don't know. No.
We don't have any idea.
So what did that time look like with you and the kids? You've got these kids. Probably many of the 16 grandkids might not yet have been born, or
we
some.
had all but the last 6.
Okay.
So we
you've got
had
10. You've got
So
5
how old were
kids,
your
10
kids at the time?
all of them were married. So this is 6 years ago. They were between 22 and about probably 24 to 35.
Okay.
Right around there.
So young adult, kind of starting their own married life, maybe some family.
Yep.
During that time, did you feel like, okay, we've only got a few days, let's cherish it? Are you thinking we're going to get in there and operate and then fight this and have a couple of years?
All of the above.
All of it.
All of the above.
Can you tell?
We took a week and went to Bear Lake and spent a week as a family in Bear Lake and had some really tender moments there that, as I look back on the experience, I realized that I think subconsciously he knew his time was limited, but not wanting to worry us, he put on the brave front. And interesting to watch him, he wouldn't really grieve in front of me. And I felt a little bit resentful of that because I would watch his daughters bring him a Diet Coke or drop by to say hello, and I'd watch his reaction with them, but he just didn't have the same reaction with me. And as I tried to talk to him, he would put this wall up, and I'd say, I don't understand this. Help me explain. I wasn't there when you lost your arm as a senior, so help me explain. How are you processing this? Mm-hmm. And he said, the only thing I can say is that, he said, my sister Nancy came in after I'd lost my arm, and she said to me, Matt, you just lost your arm. Tell me how you feel. And he said, I can't go there. And he looked right at me and said, I can't go there.
Was that as a senior in high school?
As a senior in high school, yeah.
So what had happened there to kind of sideline for a second?
He went to Weber High and had been sent on an errand to another high school with 3 of his high school buddies. And they don't do that anymore, but
Sure.
They were in a Jeep, and a bus was stopped in the middle of the road right there by Kurt's Drive-In.
Okay.
I know you,
yeah, right on Washington
yes,
Boulevard, sure.
The bus was stopped and had no brake lights. So the Jeep came upon the bus, and when they realized the bus was stopped, they swerved, and when they came back down, my husband's arm was caught between the roll bar of the Jeep and the bus. And so it took his arm off, and he was actually the first emergency room patient at, used to be St. Ben's, now Ogden Regional. Yeah.
Really?
He was the very first
So
emergency
he'd been
room patient.
through trauma before.
Yes.
And you said the way that he explained it was he just couldn't let himself.
He couldn't go there with me. And I didn't realize at the time it was a protection for me. I've come to realize that since then, but he just couldn't go there. And he started talking about selling the house and let's get you in a townhouse. And
He's trying to think of ways to take care of you
Yes.
after he's gone.
and I would actually get upset and say, I can't think about cleaning my closets right now. I got to get you through this brain tumor. You know, we've got to get through this surgery.
Yeah, you're jumping ahead of things.
Huntsman was waiting for some piece of equipment, so we had a little bit of time before his surgery. They had to get the equipment back in, and what happened was he went in for surgery on the 22nd, and they told us they were expecting about a 4.5-hour surgery. And at Huntsman, they have this chart you can look at by color where your patient falls. And an hour and a half later, they were closing him up based on this chart. And so as I'm looking at him, I think something's not right. They told us this was going to be 4.5-hour surgery. And anyway, the doctor came out and he said we were unable to get very much of it out, and he said, but I have this patient. I actually just met with her. She had the same thing, and she's going on 18 years.
Whoa.
We can start chemo and radiation. So that's the path we thought we were headed down. And okay,
So
we'll
kind of
take
gave
this,
you some hope.
take this information and go home with that. I felt a little uneasy. They released us from Huntsman just 4 days later, and I felt very unprepared to go home and take care of a brain surgery patient. And I remember the nurse saying to me, his sodium levels were so low when we left, they had to give him an extra bag of IV, and she sent me home with these sodium pills, and she said, if his sodium levels drop, let us know. And I remember thinking,
I'm not a nurse.
I said out loud, how am I going to know if
how
his
do I
sodium
know?
level?
Yeah.
And she said, you'll be able to tell because his speech will be slurred. And I said, his speech has been slurred
Since
since
the
his first
beginning.
seizure.
Yeah.
So it was not going to be any indication. So I felt very unprepared to take him home, but we got him home, and I remember when he walked in, he seemed to walk in the door fine. He was great on the way home. I sat him down on the couch, and then we had a neighbor that followed him in and talked to him for minutes. I could tell he was just getting so worn out, and all my kids and grandkids were about to descend and bring dinner over, and none of the grandkids had seen him up at Huntsman, so I said, sure, bring him over, we'll have dinner. Bought him a recliner to recover from in the bedroom, and he said, I have this, and he was trying to say the word excruciating, but he couldn't get the word out. So he kept saying, and I said excruciating, and he nodded. And then he said he felt like he had to throw up. I said, well, let's get you to the recliner. So where he had walked into the house fine, as he's walking back to the bedroom, he's shuffling like a 95-year-old man.
Just in a matter of moments, that changed.
Yes. And
And how old was he? Can I ask?
He was 59.
Oh, that's
he
still
was
too young.
He was a marathon runner, was very healthy, conscious eater, very, all the things that I'm not. He was, and I'm telling you, it threw us all for a loop. But as I got him back to the base of the bed, he started just heaving violently. Oh. And I got him to the chair, went to empty the bowl, and when I came back, he was having another seizure. And he was squeezing my hand, just squeezing. And I could tell by his eye, his pupil was very dilated, and I knew what was happening. And just then I heard one of my daughters walk in and said, "Kylie, call 911." And so she got the ambulance there, and then we started down the other path of life flighting him to back to the University of Utah. They did what's called a craniectomy at that point, where they took off his whole skull and to relieve the pressure of the blood that had built up there. And throughout the night, we weren't sure what was going to happen. We felt a little bit hopeful, but I hadn't slept for 4 days because I'd been at Huntsman with him. And so my son-in-law said, "Let me stay with him. You go home and get some sleep and take a shower, and we'll all regroup in the morning." So that's what we decided to do. But there were just signs throughout the night that this wasn't going to go well. We weren't going to have a good ending. And the next morning when I got up, I remember standing there looking in the closet thinking, I have to pick out the ugliest shirt that I own because I'm going to throw it away. And little things like that.
I understand
Yeah,
that. I am a clothing memory connected person.
Is that the craziest?
No, I totally get it. Yeah. It's just sometimes clothing can hold memories, and if you have something you really love, you don't want to have it with a terrible memory.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and why that came to me, because at that point we didn't know what the outcome was going to be. I remember thinking each of my kids is going to want a pair of his cowboy boots. As I'm standing there in the closet looking, I had no concept of how many pair of cowboy boots he had, because he rotated them, and some were there and some were new and some were gone. And
so you got dressed that morning and went back to the hospital.
Back to the hospital. Once again, another social worker comes in and wants to sit down and have introductions. And I remember being so irritated thinking,
there's not time for small talk.
We all know each other.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do introductions around the table. And I think she could sense that I was not okay with the introductions. And so they brought the doctor in, and basically he put the x-ray up that they had taken at Davis Hospital when they...
The first day?
Once he had the stroke, the emergency room, or the paramedics took him to Davis Hospital. And Davis Hospital had to keep him for an hour and a half before they life flighted him and run several tests there. So he put the x-rays and he had stroked out from the top of his head down to his brainstem. And so there was just, he just kept saying, the doctor kept saying to me, did he fall? Did he have a head trauma? Did he get hit?
Because that's what the scan made it look like.
And I kept saying, no, he didn't fall. I was with him all the time. What is, and he said, because this is indicative. Indicative, that's the right word. Indicative of somebody that's had a trauma.
A head trauma.
The way that he'd stroked out.
And it was just a stroke.
Yeah. So the hospital, Huntsman did OSHA's not the right word. What's the word where they come in and do like an investigation, of what was happening? My kids wanted to talk to Dr. Jensen, and I talked to Dr. Jensen, and he said, I would love to meet with your kids, but I have my team doing a study, and then Huntsman's doing their own. Should we wait until both of those come back, and then we'll have a conversation?
And so how long did it take for those to come back?
Oh, it was probably 3 or 4 weeks.
Really?
Yeah.
So he passed away that day?
Yeah. They told us in that meeting that I could keep him on life support, or we could move him to comfort care and keep him comfortable until he passed, and that would be our decision. And all of us knew he would not want to be in that condition, and so that's what happened. I remember praying, just saying, I cannot listen to him gasp for air for 2 days, because they told us it could take up to 48 hours for his organs to shut down. And I just remember praying, saying, I cannot listen to this for 48 hours, please. And it was about 4 hours after they removed everything. His sister was able to get in from Seattle, and about 4 hours later, we were all
and the kids were there?
Yes, we were all there, and we were actually telling funny stories about him, and my son was right in the middle of the story, and he took his last gasp for air. And
oh, my goodness.
It was a bittersweet moment.
So you have not just the shock of his passing, you're still dealing with the shock of the diagnosis.
Right.
Because it's that quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was very, very fast.
Oh, Stephanie, my heart just breaks for all of you. So what happens next? You're at the hospital. You're in trauma. As I said, this isn't just grief. This is trauma. Walk us through maybe those first few days or weeks. Who or what helped you survive the immediate aftermath of something so traumatic?
Well, I feel like that's when your support angels come in, and you have those earthly angels that step in and pick you up and move you forward and help you make decisions. What I didn't understand, I knew nothing about widow's fog. And you guys, I knew nothing. And actually,
I didn't either.
Actually, when somebody told me that term, I kind of chuckled out loud and thought, oh, yeah,
like, what is
right.
that?
And I had no idea that, I mean, he spoiled me so much that this is embarrassing. I shouldn't even admit this, but I did not even know how to put gas in my car with a credit card because
he took such great care of you.
He filled up my car and washed my car for me every Saturday morning. He would set my alarm. He would get up and run my bath so I could sleep for 15 more minutes. He was just that kind of a person. And so, yeah, it was that.
And then you're in the fog where you can't remember your own name,
I can't
let
even
alone
make
how
a
to do the
decision.
things right.
Exactly.
And there's so many decisions to make.
So many decisions. I remember having to say to my son at the time, I need you to go to the gas station with me and show me how to do this with a credit card because I don't know how to do it.
Oh, my goodness.
So,
That is rough. That is rough. That widow's fog is something else. In fact, the first time I met physically Jennie was at her husband's.
It was the viewing.
The viewing.
Yeah, the night before the burial.
And I hugged her and I said, you're not going to remember me because you're in a fog right now.
Yeah.
And anyway, that was the first time we had met. But I was like 3 months into it. And
you were just barely.
I was in the thick of the fog still. You know, that,
I remember,
that fog is just
I remember
heavy.
my sister, a couple of years after Brent died, she said something to me about how, I don't know if she said it was 6 or 9 months, some amount of time. She said, you were just, all of a sudden one day you were back. Mm-hmm. And all of us just looked around and said, oh, Jennie's back. And I said, well, I don't feel like I went anywhere. I feel like I was there. I mean, it's blurry, but I feel like I've lived through it. I certainly lived through it, right?
Yeah.
Stephanie.
But it is a fog, right?
It's a thick, absolute fog. And some days I think
fog.
I'm still in it.
Yeah.
I think we go in and out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what resilience means to you through these 5-6 years now?
Resilience, to me, obvious, bounce back and move forward. And I heard somebody say, I'm not moving on, I'm moving forward. Mm-hmm. And I thought, that defines me. I will never be over him.
Right.
I don't want to ever be over him. I don't want to lose my memories of him. But I will move forward, and I have moved forward in my life. And
That's
I think
so
resilience is just picking up, knowing that you can't do it, but putting one foot in front of the other. And
doing it anyway.
I sent my daughters and daughters-in-law something yesterday for Mother's Day through a text, and that's basically what it said was there are days when we want to throw in the towel, we want to curl up in the fetal position and put the blanket over our head, but we don't, and we pick up and we move on and we move forward. And I just
or some days we lay in bed
right
under that minky.
Right. Under the
how many minkies can I bury myself in today?
You know, it's interesting you say that. It is a key indicator to me. I feel like people that haven't lost someone that they truly loved and who have really walked through this, those people will say it's time to move on.
Right.
But for all of us who have lost somebody, who has worked through our grief, who is still working through it, I feel myself getting emotional. That's kind of surprising. But we have to come to the realization that we're not moving on, that we can only move forward, and that we're going to carry this grief with us, that it's going to reside with us somewhere, and we have to make peace with it and accept it as part of who we now are.
And I am not the same person. I look back and I think to myself, a lot of the things that I've learned, I couldn't have learned any other way. And that is a horrible way to have to learn the lessons that we need to learn. But I feel like I'm not the same person. I'm a completely different person. I mean, I'm the same person at my core, but I view things differently now, and I'm grateful for those lessons. I have nothing but gratitude now as I look back.
My mom was asking me some questions about kind of like what I thought about my sister and her husband. She had lost her husband. And I said to my mom, I think sometimes people die young, and unfortunately it's to teach the rest of us a lesson. And when my husband got diagnosed, I immediately connected to that story. And I thought, John has given a huge sacrifice so that I can learn whatever it is I need to learn that I was unwilling to learn.
Unwilling to learn any other way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Stephanie, I love what you said. Nothing but gratitude. I think that's such a resilient mindset to be able to see the lessons, to see the change, to acknowledge that it was a very difficult way to learn them, but that learning did come, and that there is the compensating blessings of such loss. Can you tell us, what does it look like now with your family, with the kids and grandkids? How do you remember your husband? How do you help the children as they grow, the little ones, the next generation? And what about, how are your kids doing with that grief with you? And
each one of them grieves differently, and that's okay. That's okay. When I hear a George Strait song, I just have to cry through it and then move on. I have 2 daughters that can't hear a George Strait song. They will change the channel.
Just skip it.
They'll just skip right over it. Yeah.
Too close.
So, and it's okay. Grief is fine. As my sons are teaching their kids how to ski now, Matt was such a huge skier and had my kids on the hill every single Saturday. That was just such a big part of their life. And now I just watch them with their kids, and I'm sad that Grandpa Matt wasn't there. I actually had one of them say to me this last season, "Oh, I wish so bad that I could have been there working with Hank, and Dad would have taken Hallie and had her." And that's just who he was. He was an incredible person that loved big and worked hard and was a great dad and a great grandpa. And my family is incredible. I could not have gotten through this without the support of my kids and their spouses. They've all got great spouses with great families, and it's a blessing every day. So
I love that you have each other. A lot of times grief can tear a family apart. I mean, we've seen that. And like you said, everyone grieves differently, and it's important to leave space for that. There's not a right way to grieve or a right timeline, but to be able to turn toward each other and not turn on each other is beautiful. Not everyone has that.
That's a great beautiful way to put it. Yeah, and those grandkids, I'll tell you, we had 2 that were born shortly after he passed away, 2 little girls. And, I just know that they got to see him last. They were the last ones to see him.
They were right there with him.
Yep. And that's when I say living in gratitude. That's how I feel. I'm grateful for the legacy that he left. I'm grateful for the grandkids that I get to see him in their faces, and just try and be grateful every day for something.
That's a huge tool of resilience.
Yeah,
that attitude of gratitude. As cliche as it sounds, it really is so powerful. Whether it's a gratitude journal or just your mindset or what to think that way can change, really just kind of rewire the brain from some of that tragedy and the weight and the darkness to where it still hurts, but it's beautiful at the same time.
Right.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story.
Absolutely.
It's so interesting. We actually met at a Pilates class earlier, and we just reconnected as you walked in.
How long ago was that was the Pilates class?
It was in 2019, so it was a year after.
So shortly after both of you lost.
So it was right before I was starting this podcast, and we were still in our grief. So
yes, we were.
Yeah, we had no idea, but I felt a connection with you there. We had such a fun time at that class.
We did.
It's just so interesting.
And we talked in the parking lot for a minute after.
Full circle.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, I love this.
All right, Stephanie, before we close out, I'd love to hear if you have any words about, I know you've told us what resilience means to you, but what has moving forward looked like for you? Maybe if there's a listener who's going through something so difficult and is so tired of hearing people say, move on, move on, move on. Maybe talk us through the idea of moving forward and how you're able to do that while still honoring the beautiful love and loss, not leaving it behind, but kind of carrying
it with me.
Yeah, because I just love how you said that. I'd love to just know a little bit more about that before we close.
It's been so interesting as I've dated a little bit over the past couple of years. One of the indicators for me is, are people threatened if I talk about my husband? I can't be with somebody who's threatened and won't let me, because the
Which
first
is pretty common in
well, the
my
first date I
experience.
went, and I remember thinking, this is so awkward. I can't talk about one thing. He's in every inch of my life. I don't even have anything
Right.
to say to this person.
I am who I am because I spent so
Yes.
many years with him.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's very refreshing to find somebody that is not threatened by his memory, that's not thinking that they might replace him.
Sure. Erase
So-
that part.
Exactly. That just lets you talk freely about him and share the good parts, because there were a lot of good parts. So
Yeah.
moving forward, I think for me, every day is different. Like I said, I had to get a whole new focus. Minky has been great for that. Mike and Sandy walked in. The part I left out was with 7 baskets of Minkies for my kids and me and my parents up to the hospital that night. We were also traumatized, and they've been a blessing. They've been a huge part of my recovery. Mike Kendry
Those
just
beautiful
said,
people.
Mike Kendry put his arm around my dad at the hospital, who he'd never met, and said, I just want you to know I'll take care of your daughter.
Oh.
And truer words,
And he meant it.
Truer words were never
And
spoken.
he meant it. It wasn't shallow words.
No,
Yeah.
they have been an absolute blessing in my life. So
Oh, I love what you
that's
call
amazing.
your support angels that might be
Yeah.
on earth and they might be spiritual angels, but there's both.
and Mike loved Matt.
Stephanie, it's been a beautiful conversation of hope and healing, even in the midst of true trauma, not just tragedy, but trauma. I didn't realize the circumstances behind his passing. So thank you for being willing to share that with us. Thanks for being willing to come into the studio and just share your heart. Isn't there just such a beautiful aura about her?
Yeah.
I just love
when
you.
I met her at Pilates, we had a great time, and she was there with a friend. And that's why I said I felt a connection with you. And it's so funny when you walked in the door and said, we've met before. And I'm like, wait, what?
And here's that connection.
It's just so fun. It's so fun. I love what you shared too, because grief is so different, and it's such a different journey for every person. But there's some threads of truth that just exist.
And they resonate.
And they resonate for everyone who's lost
Right.
somebody that they loved. And I've heard that certainly in your story. And
Yeah, you were able to beautifully articulate a lot
Yeah.
of things.
Well,
There's-
thank you.
there's parts of your story that, really connect. My husband had cancer, and you talked about not wanting to hear him breathe like that. And I spent the last week of my husband's life saying, how much longer? Because he was death gurgling for days, more than a week. And it was just, my daughter finally was staying with me, and she would wear headphones and I would wear earbuds at night to sleep, because it was just so,
It is.
It's
is
traumatizing in
a
and of itself.
traumatizing sound in and of itself. So
Right.
I'm sure other people that have had those
experienced that.
experiences will connect with that. I certainly did when you shared that with us.
Well, and I would say, I remember my kids for the first 2 weeks, my girls were like, who's on mama watch? And one of them was in my bed with me every night.
Yeah.
And
Making sure you weren't alone.
I was okay going to bed, but it was that waking up the next morning.
And it's
that-
still true.
And that gut punch of, oh my gosh, this is my reality.
Yeah, I'm just so sad that it was so soon. It just, that would be so hard.
Yeah.
So hard
So
to.
quick.
And that not only was it so soon, there was so much in those few weeks: surgery, recovery, getting home. You did,
Yeah.
I
Like you
mean,
said,
the
I'm sure you
blessing
didn't
was
sleep
one
the whole
week.
3 weeks. Right.
No,
Yeah.
No, it was a whirlwind.
The blessing
did
was
we make
that
the right
week in Bear
decision?
Lake,
Do we
right?
have Do we have the
Yeah.
right surgeon? Do we have the
Yeah.
is this the right path for us? And there was
Yeah.
one thing that he said. We were all kind of in Bear Lake. We were kind of arguing over whether we had the right surgeon and this was the right course. And my son-in-law looked at him and said, Matt, you haven't said anything. Tell me what you think. And he said, I need to backtrack a little bit. In Bear Lake, he kind of wandered away. We didn't know where he was, and we all kind of got a little bit panicked. And as he walked back through the parking lot, he said he'd been over sitting on a fence watching a pivot over a hayfield, which would have been heaven for him. And he said, I got my answer that day sitting on that fence. And he says, I'm going to stay the course. So I have a big sign in my house that says stay the course. Yeah.
Oh, that's
And that's actually on his headstone too, because, another part of resilience too, I think just he
Stay
says,
the
I'm
course.
going to stay the course on the plan that we've made. And he knew. And as I watched him with clients, that's why I said I think he knew and understood subconsciously, maybe not
Right.
consciously.
Maybe not consciously, right.
Right.
But something
I love
deeper.
The big points that I'm taking away from your story is that accepting what is, looking for the blessings, and deciding to make the best of a terrible
Of a
situation.
terrible situation.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a great message.
It's an incredible message, Stephanie. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in today. We hope you felt what we have felt, and we also hope that you'll maybe consider sharing your story. Stephanie, like many of the rest of you, anytime we ask someone, there's a little hesitation. Oh, I don't think I have much to share, but I think we've learned today there's a lot to share in each story, and it's a great conversation to have. So if you're listening and have a story you're willing to share, we'd love to hear it and learn from you the tools of resilience you've developed through the challenges that you faced in your life. You can email us at rrpodcast@ksl.com or find us on social media. Facebook and Instagram both have a little Calendly link at Relentlessly Resilient Podcast, where you can reach out and to do a conversation to talk about what it would be like to come on the show. Find us on your favorite podcast platform. Give us a like, a rating, and a review. It really helps us get the word out about the show. And as always, thank you to Kellyanne Halverson, our producer, and Minky Couture, our sponsor.
Remember, whatever you do today, remember to be kind. You have no idea the struggles others are dealing with in their lives. Have a great day.